everybody. Well, thank you so much. Please have a seat. Let me just first say that I was backstage before Anshul came out, and I've never heard such a quiet, orderly group. So hopefully, now that we're kind of warmed up, people will be not feeling so obliged to be so formal. Yeah, there you go. So let me see if I can get this right. Bahut? Dhanyavad? Oh, is that right? Okay. And I want to welcome you to the first of many Obama Foundation town halls that we're going to be planning around the world. Hello to everybody who is watching on obama.org. It is wonderful to be back in India and back in Delhi. Almost 3 years ago, I had the tremendous honor of being the first American president to join for Republic Day. I will say my most vivid memory was those acrobats on the motorcycles. Those guys were amazing. A little over 7 years ago, my first stop on a visit to Asia was here, and I had the privilege to address your parliament. In 2009, I recognized India at the White House with my first state dinner, and we danced some Bhangra. And, we have had Diwali celebrations in the White House every year that I was there. And all of this is because, as I said in a speech that I gave this morning, India and the United States have so much in common. The U.S. is home, of course, to millions of Indian Americans, and their proud heritage is, at the same time, combined with an incredible contribution that they make in every field in the United States. Both of our countries are hugely diverse, and we've got different languages and different backgrounds and different ethnicities and different faiths. But what we also have in common is a set of values that we believe in deeply. And I believe that the partnership between the world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy could be a defining partnership of the 21st century. Now, I also believe that charting the course for that better future is going to depend on all of you. It's going to depend on young people. There are all sorts of things that I care about, all sorts of specific issues that I'm going to continue to work on, and I plan to lend my voice to focus the rest of my career on. I'll be out there advocating on behalf of doing something about climate change and doing something about inequality and making sure that women are getting the same opportunities as men and fighting against, there you go, and fighting against the forces of discrimination and tribalism and racism. But the single most important thing that I want to focus on is lifting up and identifying and working with and training the next generation of leadership, not just in the United States, but all around the world. And that's really the central goal of our foundation. It's going to be based in Chicago, my hometown, but we want to have projects, programs, partnerships, and digital networks everywhere. And I'm not just lending my name to the foundation, I'm going to be an active part of it. This year I've already met with young people like yourselves in Germany, in Indonesia, in Brazil, and then we had our first ever Obama Foundation Summit in Chicago. And I don't want to speak too long because I want to spend most of our time on questions, and Anshul is going to help to moderate it. But I did want to mention the reason I thought it was so important to do something in India. You've got the largest population of young people in the world, and that's a lot, so we might as well start big. We've already identified some remarkable young leaders who are doing extraordinary things here in India, authors, athletes, artists, entrepreneurs, civic leaders from all across the country. We've got activists who are working on everything from education to gender equality to climate change. A couple of young leaders were recently with us in Chicago, and I just want to acknowledge them. Tricia Shetty started, where is she? There she is. Did you have fun in Chicago? Oh, see there, I didn't call on her to say that, but thank you. But Tricia started an organization called She Says, aimed at educating and empowering men and women to take action against sexual abuse. Also joining us in Chicago was Sanchana Krishnan, who works with communities to destigmatize mental health issues through the power of personal storytelling. Where's there you are, there you are. And here in India, we've got young leaders like Kuldeep Dantewadia, who's building, where's Kuldeep? There he is. He's building this country's first, what he calls Solve Squad, of 17,500 young people so far who are driving change at the local level all across India. So the point is that these young people are already showing the power that anybody has if they take the initiative and have the courage, as Anshul said, to drive change, to make a difference. And there have never been more powerful, more accessible tools for each of you to make a difference than there are today. And in fact, I would argue, and I mentioned this in my speech earlier this morning, there's never been a better time to be a young person. I mean, it's always good being young, by the way. But if you think about it, if you had to choose a moment in history in which you could be born, and you didn't know ahead of time who you were going to be, you didn't know what your status would be, you didn't know whether you were going to be male, female, Indian, or American, you didn't know whether you were going to be gay, straight, you didn't know whether you were going to be rich or poor, what caste you might be a member of, what religion. So you're just a human, and you had to choose when to be born. You choose now. Because as troubled as our politics are, as difficult as the world can seem when you're watching the newscasts, the fact is that over the past 100 years, we've come from a world where only a small fraction of women could vote to a world where almost every woman can. Since 1950, the global average life expectancy has grown by more than 20 years. Since 1990, I mean, that's not that long ago. I was in law school in 1990. We've cut extreme poverty and childhood mortality in half. Much of that, by the way, in India and China. Since 2000, we've evolved from a world without marriage equality to one in which it's a reality in more than 24 countries. The fact is, the world has never been healthier, it has never been wealthier, and despite terrible conflicts that are still taking place around the world, and remarkable cruelty and suffering, the world is actually less violent and more tolerant than it's ever been. Fewer people are dying young, more people are living not only longer but better, more girls are attending school, more adults can read, more children have the vaccines that they need. And the point is that none of this happened just because of luck. It happened because people chose to make it happen. And many of those people, working over the course of many years, started without power or wealth or title. And many of them were extraordinarily young, just like you. I always have to remind people that when you think of somebody like Dr. Martin Luther King, who did so much in our country, he was 24, 25 years old when he began as an activist in Montgomery, Alabama, to try to desegregate the South. And he started in small steps, and it was only a few years later where he won the Nobel Prize and would help to revolutionize America. But it wasn't just Dr. King, it was all these young people around him who were just like us. You know, they had their flaws, they had their problems, they had their doubts, but despite all those imperfections, they pressed forward anyway, often far from the limelight, with determination and with faith in the future, because they believed that their efforts would matter and that they would be part of this upward trajectory in our human story. So that's the legacy that is available to you should you choose to grab it. That should inspire each of you to keep pushing for progress in whatever field you're in and whatever communities that you live in, knowing that your efforts matter. And I hope that all of you stay engaged after this session and are prepared to work with each other and work with us, and let other young leaders know about how we can continue to build up a community of change around the world. And that way, next time I come back to India, you guys will be here waiting for me, and you can tell me all the amazing progress that you've already made. All right? Okay. So enough talk. Let's, we're going to get Anshu back out here. Here he is. I said, by the way, that I thought he was the sharpest dresser of any introducer that I've had. I think that's a good outfit. I can't get away with it. It's a little too hip for me. But we're going to sit here. We're going to use these mics. Yes. Okay. All right. And sometimes I may stand up just because I've been sitting a lot and I'm going to have a long flight to Paris right after this. So don't mind me. Should I start? Or? Yeah. Okay. So there aren't any big ground rules on this. This is just a conversation. The only rules are that if I call on you, you have to stand up if you can and introduce yourself so that people know who you are. Tell us a little bit, but not too long, about what you're doing. And the only other rule is we're going to go boy, girl, because sometimes men talk too much. So that way we can assure ourselves that there's parity and equality, because we have to model the kind of world that we want. All right, we're going to start with you because you had your hand up first, and we've got microphones so that everybody else can hear you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir, and
Yes.
thank you for giving us a beautiful opportunity to come and speak to you about what we are doing in our field work and how we can contribute to your vision of a global community. Right. Sir, my name is Preeti Khanna. I'm a Delhi University student. I'm a PhD scholar, and I'm currently working on nutrition and mental health of adolescents. So my question to you is, sir, that what is your vision of a global health community, and how can we as young leaders contribute towards it?
Well,
Thank you.
That's a great question, and I suspect you know more of the answers than I do. But I'll go ahead and offer a general view on what I've learned during the course of my presidency. The first point is that if you have a healthy community, particularly starting with healthy children, that's going to be one of the greatest indicators of overall development for a country. So it is not only good for the individual that there's a public health infrastructure that is promoting people's well-being, but it's also good economic policy. And what I've learned is that it starts with young people, because young people are naturally healthy if people don't screw them up. And the more that you can emphasize prevention, the better off you're going to be. If you think about advanced economies, some of the progress that has been made has to do with the marvels of technology and science. And thankfully, because of things like vaccines and other discoveries, we can cure diseases that in the past we could not cure. But probably the single biggest contributor, for example, to the health and longevity of people in more advanced countries were things like clean drinking water and proper ways of eliminating waste and sewage systems. Because what those things did was prevent diseases from taking root in the first place. So obviously there are going to be differences in the communities and even within countries, much less between countries. I don't claim to be an expert on what are some of the most important public health issues in India, but I think it's fair to say that we can anticipate that basic prenatal care for mothers, that's a universal investment that when you make pays huge dividends. Children's brains develop in the womb and then in the earliest stages of life, and if you've made that investment early, then typically they're going to do much better. Having the sorts of infrastructure that I described around clean drinking water, and since we're in Delhi, I have to mention clean air. That, I think, is a big and important investment. Basic things like vaccinations to prevent diseases that in many parts of the world have already been entirely cured. Those are cheap, modest efforts that we can provide. And then I think nutrition and just making sure that not only do people have enough to eat, but that they have enough variety in their diets. And the interesting thing when it comes to nutrition is that for developing countries, my hope would be that they leapfrog some of the bad habits that have developed in advanced countries around processed foods and take advantage of locally grown, more natural products, which actually can then benefit farmers and provide an economic base that is less concentrated than the highly processed foods that have taken root in many economies that result in the United States, for example, with huge increases in obesity and all the consequent health problems there. So, so you've got a lot of work to do and a lot of people to help, and I'm sure you're going to do a great job. I'm going to return to a theme that I already mentioned earlier, though, and that is because it's so important to start with children, that means that you have to make sure that the mothers are getting the support that they need, including, by the way, educating mothers, because if mothers are empowered and have an education and have some economic base of their own, typically their children are going to do better as well. Okay? Good. Thank you. Thanks for the great question. Okay. No standing up, though. That's not going to be a strategy. I'm teasing you, but it's true. Yeah, the yelling thing won't work either. Gentleman in the blue shirt right there. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess there were a bunch of blue shirts.
I'm going to
go ahead.
Ask the question anyways. So first of all, Mr. Obama, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to be here. A lot taller than I thought you'd be.
You know, it's interesting. People always say that. I don't know why folks thought I was short. But my theory is because Michelle is tall. People don't, they kind of think, oh, they don't realize how tall she is, so they think, anyway, yeah, I'm a tall guy. Sure. All right, go ahead. Anyway.
So my name is Uday Keith. I am a data science instructor in Bangalore. We teach out of Byte Academy. So we teach data sciences and also blockchain development. So when the Obama Foundation or any organization has the goal of training our youth, I want to understand from your point of view, where does technology fit into that aspect or that process?
It's a great question. And I think that, first of all, I was mentioning earlier today, I think that technology is this incredible potential force for good, but it also has problems and limits, and we have to understand how we can best use it for good, but also avoid some of the traps of technology. When it comes to training young people, the obvious advantage of technology is you can just leverage and reach more people very quickly. So when I started my campaign in 2008, we were one of the earliest adapters of social media. And we weren't favored in my election, but the big advantage I had was I had a lot of enthusiastic volunteers and supporters all across the country. It would have been impossible for us to directly coordinate with all of them without building some huge staff and bureaucracy and infrastructure. The fact that we had social media available fairly early, not, by the way, because I was so brilliant, but because I had a bunch of young people who said, why don't we try this thing? And we were using MySpace back then. I mean, like, you know, Facebook didn't exist, and Twitter, I don't think, did either at that point. That's how old I am. But what it meant was we could just send out information. You know, if we had somebody in a fairly remote area who wanted to start being part of our campaign, we could just transmit information to them directly, tell them, here's Obama's stance on all the issues, here's how you should approach organizing your local community, and suddenly they had a tool that they could work with, and they could communicate back with us. And so that basic principle, right, that right now I can reach millions of people just through writing a quick note on a device, allows us then to get more information more quickly to more people, and then have them interact and get feedback. And that's wonderful. Now, when it comes to technology and education, what we found is, and because you're a teacher, I think it's important to emphasize, it doesn't replace the importance of teachers. And what I've seen sometimes is people think, okay, we're going to put a computer in the classroom, and then somehow magically kids are going to be better educated. No, if the teacher is not incorporating the technology into the social context in which children are learning, then it's not going to work. Any training, any leadership development program, if it's just relying on technology, but it's not thinking about how do you, once you have somebody online, how do you also form communities offline? You know, if you've given them information on their devices, how are you allowing them to apply that in a social context and interacting with people? If you're not doing that, then it's probably going to be a failure. It's not a magic fix for everything. And in fact, that brings me to my final point on technology, which is what we're finding now is that the dangers of technology are that it can actually isolate people. So they become so hooked to their device that they no longer have a conversation. And because of the algorithms that are often being used for people when they're searching for information, what we're discovering now is that people start having their pre-existing biases constantly reinforced through the device. And they never hear information that diverges from what they already believe. They stop listening to or interacting with people who don't agree with them. And that's not how you learn. That's not how you become a leader, is simply surrounding yourself with opinions that already fit your own, right? And don't challenge you or force you out of your comfort zone or force you to empathize and think about other people. And so what I'm really trying to focus on is how do we build a digital network in the Obama Foundation that allows people to meet, converge, share ideas, but also forces people to act offline after meeting online, forces people to have conversations outside of the internet, forces them to then meet and engage people who are not already part of the converted. Because I think if you do that, then you have a powerful tool. If you don't do that, then you will limit the amount of influence and impact ultimately that you're going to have. And that's not what we should be teaching our kids, is somehow just to stay in a very narrow, safe place. We want them to get out and meet the world, because that's how they're going to be able to grow their influence. All right? Excellent question. All right, now the way this is working, we've got actually, speaking of technology, there are people who are watching. There were a lot of people who wanted to come today. We didn't have enough seats. So as a consequence, we've got a bunch of questions that are also coming online. And Anshul, he was not just here for decoration. He is actually going to, he actually has questions, and so we're going to alternate every so often. We're going to bring in some questions that came in online. Go ahead.
President Obama, our first question is from Instagram by Lipi Mehta. And the question is actually something that a lot of us actually wonder, people especially who work on social change. That change is you know, a painfully slow process, and it can get really demotivating at times, especially for people around you who work with you. So how do you continue to encourage people around you? How does one do that?
That is a great question. Because you're right, change is hard. I'll just go back to an example that I'm very familiar with from my own country. I mentioned Dr. King earlier, and the movement for equal rights for African Americans. What people don't really recognize is that from the time that the Supreme Court of the United States declared that separate schools for people of different races was inherently unequal, which happened in 1954, to the time when a law was actually passed that would implement that in a serious way, that was a decade. Then it took another decade or so of court fights and battles and so forth before you actually saw schools get, in a serious way, desegregated. So that's 20 years from the time you have what looks like a victory until you're even actually seeing significant effects in society. And there are guaranteed analogous situations here in India where it feels like, man, we've been working for a long time, and we thought we had a victory, and then suddenly it seems it's not having an effect, and we've got to keep on going, and we're refighting battles that we thought we had already won. And if you're working at a local level, then it can be even more frustrating and discouraging, because you don't have the benefit of, you know, publicity and TV cameras and a sense of a big movement. You feel isolated and alone sometimes, and you're just trying to work, and nobody's really persuaded that what you are trying to do is possible. So a couple of things that I would just suggest. The first is know ahead of time that change is hard, so that you're setting your own expectations properly and you're not getting discouraged. Point number two is to try to break up your efforts into bite-sized pieces, manageable pieces. You know, one of the classic things that I used to do in training young organizers, I would say to them, if your goal is eliminating world hunger, you're going to get discouraged very quickly. If your goal is, here's a local community and I'm going to try to help feed X number of people over the course of the next couple of years. Well, that's something that's achievable. So you want to make sure, it doesn't mean that you should set your sights low. It just means that you're breaking up your actions and activities into something that feels achievable, because then when you are mobilizing supporters and partners and others who want to work with you, you're going to create victories along a regular schedule, and that makes people feel as if what they're doing is worthwhile. The third point I would make is make sure that you're listening to the people that you claim you want to help. Because I think one of the fastest ways that a lot of young people get discouraged is they have a theory in their head, and then they go into a community, and the theory bumps up against reality because they're trying to tell people this is what should be important to you, and the people say, that's not what I care about, right? So if you go into a rural area in India and you say to them, you need to start working on climate change right now because the way the weather patterns are shifting, the monsoon season's going to change and there's going to be terrible droughts, and people are going to say, yo, I need to, I'm worrying right now about feeding my family. And so one of the most important principles, I think, and this prevents you from that kind of discouragement, is if you've spent time listening and finding out what it is that people themselves are concerned about, then you will shape your efforts and your agenda in a way that people are responsive to. And you won't feel like you're just hitting your head against a brick wall. You'll feel as if you're in a conversation and working with people with the energy that they naturally have. That doesn't mean that it becomes easy. It just means that you're in a relationship, and relationships with the people you're working with are really important. Then it's not an abstraction. And people, oftentimes, they'll work with you when times are hard, not because they necessarily are absolutely convinced that you're gonna succeed, but because they care about you, because you have a relationship, and that's important. And then the final thing is take time to have some fun within your work. And I did not always follow this advice. All I did was party from about the age of about 15 to 20. And then something happened to me and I became very serious. And from about the age of 20 to 27, I was just always serious. And if I wasn't working, I was reading, and I only had one plate and one towel, and because everything else was wasteful, and my mother would come to visit me, and she'd say, let's go, go out to dinner, and I'd say, that's a waste, and that's a bourgeois, blah blah blah. And I just took myself very seriously, and part of it was a reaction, right? Because I had way too much fun for a while, so I felt like I had to overcompensate. But the point, though, is that in your work, I think if you're trying to do something good and important, sometimes you feel as if, all right, I have to make sacrifices, and this is hard, and I've got to really tighten everything up. There can't be any loose ends, but that's sometimes not sustainable, right? So you have to create space not just in your own life, but also in the organization, where sometimes you say, well, let's just do something fun. Sometimes let's do something that creates joy. And that can be anything from a dance to going to the movies to surfing. Did somebody say surfing? Okay, go surf, man. I mean, I didn't know there were big waves in India, but that's cool. That's cool. Okay, all right. Yeah, pizza and beer, I think is a good standard, fun thing. I'm all for pizza and beer. So anyway, I've got other stuff, but I don't want to engage in a monologue here. It was a guy I asked first, right? All right, so guys, all put your hands down. It's the ladies' turn. This is always the hardest part, is choosing people. The young lady in the white, yes, it's beautiful. Thank you. Oh, but you need a microphone. Here it comes. Here it comes.
Mr. President, I wish a great success for the Obama Foundation. I am a transgender woman. My name is Dr. Akai Padmashali. I was a sex worker. I was a beggar. I was rejected by all the sections of society. And I am the Black Beauty, and I love you.
Yes, nice, thank you, okay.
Mr. President, I have so many issues to bring before you. As a social activist, founder of Pundare, I was not able to come here today from Bangalore, Karnataka to Delhi because I was facing so much of financial crisis. Did not have money to travel here. I need to thank change.org for getting me here.
Okay.
The issue is, the two things I want to bring, one is the question, one is a request. The question is, when the state terror is against minorities, be it a transgender, be it a sexual minority, be it a class, caste, religious, race minority, when you are being stigmatized, you have been discriminated because nowhere of your reason, and the patriarchal notion and the power is dominating against you, and I want to take my strong objection on it. Right? Like the recent, like how do I speak? I'm a criminal before the section 377, which criminalizes because you are a transgender, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and how do I raise my voice against this? The second thing is about the Transgender Protection Rights Bill, where the government is not in a consultative, democratic, transparent way of discussing what exactly the community wants and not the government wants. If that's so, how do I raise my voice? How do I fight against it? That is my question to you. How do I resolve the world crisis? I think across the world, we as sexual minorities, as transgender, facing social rejection, like negligent way attitude. We are seeking for love, affection, acceptance. That is my question to you. How do I deal with that? My request, can I hug you? That's it.
Well, we can have a hug after the event's over, because otherwise I'll start.
Thank you.
We'll be doing a lot of hugging, and I won't be answering any questions. But I can't speak to the specifics of legislation in India because I'm not qualified. I have not been keeping pace with exactly what's happening in the parliament around these kinds of issues. But I can answer your more general question. And I think the answer is, it begins with what you just did, which is to find your voice and to be able to articulate your views and your experiences and tell your story. And that's true of any group that is marginalized, stigmatized. Finding that voice and being able to tell a story so that the perceptions that somehow you are different are broken down because people start recognizing their own experiences in you. They see your humanity, right? So, this is one of the reasons, by the way, why art is often a powerful tool in social change. Because what it does is, through art, suddenly people see for the first time, oh, that black person feels like I feel. Or that woman is experiencing something that I should be able to understand. There's something we have in common. Or that person of what has been considered an inferior caste. Turns out they have the same kinds of hopes and dreams that I have, right? That moment of recognition is the basis around which you begin to build political movements. Once that voice is there, hopefully others join you, right? And so now you have networks and organizations and allies. And one of the things that I think is important in terms of any effort to bring about positive change is thinking about the allies that you are that are available to you. Your issue may be climate change, or your issue may be gender equality, or your issue may be public health. But the question then sometimes is, can you find the intersection between those issues? Is there a way, if you're working on public health, to engage with environmental activists because it may be that improving air quality is a key public health issue, but it's also a key environmental issue. If you're a transgender person and you're seeking to be recognized and have full equality, well, you need to be speaking with women's groups generally who are concerned about sexual assault, right? And so forth and so on. So finding those alliances, I think, then become important. And then, once that happens, it's a matter of applying political pressure and being able to mobilize public opinion. And that's going to take some time. It's what we just talked about earlier in terms of how we can get discouraged sometimes because progress does take some time. But you should take some measure of hope by just looking at what's happened in the United States and in a lot of other countries around LGBT issues generally. I'd like to think I'm not that old, even though, my hair is a little gray. But Michelle thinks I'm still cute, she says. But when I was in college, so this would be back in the early 80s, it was just beginning for persons who were openly gay or lesbian to have student organizations. The laws on the books were still discriminatory across many states in the United States. And so now there is just an open acknowledgement, even among many conservative parties, that we should not be discriminating against persons because of sexual orientation. And that happened, with respect to human history, amazingly quickly, right? In the span of 20 years, basically. Now, in the span of one person's lifetime, that can seem painfully long. But it requires a steady education of the public, and then a political strategy that puts pressure on elected officials, and that's going to take some time. Yes, sir, right here. Let's get a microphone. And then we'll go to an internet question, online question.
So I'm Nipun Malhotra. I'm a disability rights activist and I run the Nippon Foundation. You're spending a lot of your time post-presidency on mentoring young change makers.
Yeah.
What is the role of mentors in your life?
You know, it's an interesting question. I think part of the reason that I consider this very important, the idea of mentoring, is that in some ways I didn't have as many mentors as I probably would have liked when I was coming up. My father left when I was very young, so I didn't know him. My grandparents, my grandfather, my grandmother helped my mother raise me, and they gave me all kinds of love and support. But and I had a stepfather who I lived with for 5 years, all of whom were very kind, good people. But I can't say that I had somebody who took me under their wing and kind of groomed me. I had to kind of figure a lot of stuff out on my own, which is part of the reason why I was partying from the age of 15 to 20. So I think it's the absence in some ways of mentors when I was young that makes me appreciate how valuable they were. Now, as I got older, I began to meet certain key people in my life who I think gave me ideas, gave me direction, but it wasn't very systematic. What I've discovered as I became more successful was that my ability to have an impact on people, just by paying attention to them and giving them some advice and giving them some counsel and helping them learn from mistakes I had already made, they found incredibly powerful. And I realized I would have also if I had had figures like that in my life. And so part of what we've done is we've tried to systematize this. You know, when we were in the White House, Michelle and I both would take on mentees, kids from underprivileged areas, and I'll use Michelle as an example actually, because what she did was wonderful. She would take a group of, let's say, 20 young women. These were all from poor schools, mostly African American and Latino, and you know, she would meet with them. She would like host a tea at the White House with them. She would take them to meet with college counselors to talk about how they could potentially get to school. All told, probably over the course of a year, if you added it all up, she probably didn't spend personally more than 8 hours with them. But what she was also able to do then was assign somebody from her staff to each individual person to mentor them. And if you added it all up, those young women would say that it was one of the most powerful things that had ever happened to them and changed the trajectory of their life. But it was with a relatively small investment. So it goes back to the question earlier about technology, the power of technology, how you leverage it. Mentoring is similar in the sense that you can leverage a few hours into something very powerful that can give a boost to a young person. And all of you are in a position already. If you're sitting here, that means you've already succeeded in doing some amazing things. You're already in a position to mentor somebody behind you in a way that would be transformative for them. And it wouldn't take that much time. And so if you just then think about that, you multiply that, you know, the impact of that can be profound and powerful. Go ahead.
All right, we have a question from Tejesh, who's also in the room with us right now. And Tejesh.
Well, if Tejesh is in the room,
yeah,
I'll call on him later. Let's go to a next question for somebody who wasn't in the room. Tejas, you were kind of double dipping here. Huh? You sort of like, well, if I don't get called on here, I'll get my. It's a good strategy, but I caught you.
So we have a question from Zain, and Zain asked this question on Facebook. What are the strategies for passing leadership to the upcoming younger generation for the betterment of our society?
Well, we just talked about, I think mentoring is a good strategy. One thing that's worth thinking about, some of you have probably already confronted this in your own organizations. Some of you may be the heads of organizations, and you're going to have to start thinking about this and dealing with it, is how do you empower young people once they're involved in your organizations? Because let's take the example of political parties just for a second. You know, the work we're doing in the foundation is nonpartisan, so I'm not referring to any specific political party. But one of the things that I see as I travel around the world is the political party is full of really old people who've been there forever. And look, I'm a member of the Democratic Party in the United States. I'm a very proud member. But the truth is that we have a lot of leadership that's been there for since I was a kid, or at least in college. And two things result from that. One is it means that young people who aspire to have influence get blocked. They have nowhere to go. The other thing is that over time, if you've been a leader for too long in the same spot, you start losing touch. Right? I mean, you don't have a feel for what's happening because you get set in your ways and new things happen. And what is true for political parties are true for every organization. And one of the big advantages I had in 2008 when I ran was partly because we were underdogs, partly because of my previous experiences as an organizer, our bias was to have young people come in and then we just give them huge amounts of responsibility. And we'd take some 23-year-old and we'd just throw them into some community. And we'd say, you're now the director of this community and your job is to get us this many volunteers and this number of votes and go figure it out. And then, you know, they'd come back after a while and they'll say, you know, I have no idea what I'm doing and it's not working and I'm discouraged and I'm calling my mom and wondering if I've made the right decision in my life. And then we'd work with them. But what you'd find is that over time, as long as you had a certain tolerance for errors, but also as long as you hired people and instilled with them the core values of what your organization was about, so you knew that they were going to do things the right way and treat people with respect. And you know, if they made a mistake, it wasn't a mistake of treating people badly or somehow not encouraging other people, but they'd make mistakes that we all do, especially when we haven't done things before. The bottom line, though, is that we ended up having so many more leaders with energy and new ideas. That's how our technology took off, was because we just gave responsibility to a bunch of young people and said, yeah, let's try this out. And things would happen that would not have happened if we were just hiring the same old people who had done the same old things the same way for years. So what that means then is, if you want to keep your organization fresh and engaged and attract young people into it, you can't hold all the power yourself. You can't have just a complete top-down, here's your orders, and you just, there has to be some element in which people are valued. Now that doesn't mean that, I do want to say that sometimes, in the United States at least, I don't know if this is true in India, what are called millennials get a bad rap because maybe they have such a high estimation of themselves. So we joked, we would get people coming in to the White House, young people, very talented, gone to great schools, they're very smart, and they would come in and they'd be like, I think I should be helping the president with his speeches. And I was like, well, I'm sure you're a very good writer, but right now what we really need you to do is research this memo that you were assigned and for which you are getting paid. And then maybe after you do that for 3 or 4 years, maybe you'll sit in a meeting on one of the speeches that the president and his speechwriters are working on because you actually know more than they do about the topic you were researching. So this is an argument to make, to just give people completely unrealistic expectations about what they can do, and people have to earn their stripes. They have to pay their dues. But what it does mean, though, is that don't sell people short, young people short, about what they can accomplish. Give them serious responsibilities, care about the ideas that they have. If they don't perform, explain why and how they can do better. And if you build that into the culture of your organizations, then people will stay with you and will feel invested in it because they'll see themselves growing in the process. Okay, we've got, I think it's a young woman's turn. So, oh, that was a good strategy there to distinguish yourselves. You guys are slick, all this group. This young lady right here in the, by the way, I call everybody young ladies because I'm now at the point where.
Which one was it?
I was calling on the one in the black, but I feel guilty now that you stood up. So go ahead.
Did I not do it?
Well, is it the same question? No, go ahead.
President Obama, it's wonderful to be able to meet you here. My name is Nidhi Razdan. I work with a TV channel called NDTV. I've covered your meetings with Prime Minister Modi, with Dr. Manmohan Singh as a reporter, and so it's nice to be here to just listen. My question.
You're a journalist.
Yeah.
Oh, you shouldn't. No, you don't get a chance to ask a question. Oh, hold on. No, sit down. No. I mean, look, you seem like a wonderful journalist.
Why don't you hear the question first?
And you seem very professional.
You can hear the question first and then decide if you want to answer.
No.
You might like the question.
Because the goal here was to have these young people, you should report on all the wonderful young people.
I'm doing that too.
Okay, come on. Give them a chance. Come on, you're in front of a microphone all the time. No. Sit down.
Why don't you hear the question
this young
first?
Lady. No, I'm sorry. No. Come on. Good try, though. Oh, well, that's true. You know what? Are you a journalist, too? You sure? Okay, you get your question. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, by the way, we need good journalists, and I'm so grateful that you're covering us. But you should interview these young people afterwards. They'll have more to say than I do. Go ahead.
Sorry, Nidhi. Well, President, I must actually tell you this. You're one of the finest dressed presidents in the world. Great suits. My question's really simple. My name is Malika Bajaj, and we work with a lot of women in the rural, remote village areas of my country. And what I need to understand is, so you picture a little girl with a lot of dreams, but no education. How does the Obama Foundation help people like us who are working to sort of take this forward and actually practically provide help, because these dreams deserve a life?
Well, I think the kind of work you're doing is extraordinary, and just to describe our goal for the foundation, it's not to provide direct service ourselves, because obviously we don't have the capacity to build out a staff that could tackle all the problems in India, in Kenya, and the United States. Our goal is to identify young leaders like yourself who are providing services or doing direct work or civic education or whatever it is that you're interested in, and then giving you tools. So let's say that you are setting up, you've already successfully set up some sort of education programs for these young women in rural areas. You've built up a model that really works. And your dream is, I want networks like this all across the country. Well, what do you need to do that? Presumably you need more money. How are you going to raise that? You're going to need some sort of organizational strategy to build out what you're doing, perhaps state by state. You're going to need perhaps a better media strategy and social media strategy in order to publicize what you're doing. So our goal then would be to provide you with whatever tools you need to help scale up, to help succeed. And our bet would be that if we can help you succeed on a program that's working well, not only will you help those girls that you're providing direct services to, but now you're also developing a model that perhaps activists in Tanzania can duplicate. And perhaps as we set up regional leadership summits, you are meeting with groups of people who are doing similar works to you, and you're building up a global network. And it expands in ever-widening circles, right? So that's the approach that we're going to be trying to take. And it's still in the early phases, but what we know is that the power of network effects, the power of each of you not just doing the individual work you're doing in your communities or on your specific issues, but the power that you gain from now knowing each other and communicating and trading ideas and learning, that creates a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts, right? And that's what we want to do. That's the leverage I think that we can bring. Okay? All right, the gentleman who sneakily put his card in as well as being in the audience. This better be a really good question. I'm teasing. Go ahead.
My name is Tejish. I'm a developer. Thank you for Chelsea Manning pardoning her. My question is, how do you build consensus when you have parties which are opposing views? How do you reach out to people on the other side, and how do you build consensus?
Yeah. Well, look, I think it's a powerful question. It's one that every society, every democracy is facing right now. And it's not easy. I've already indicated a couple of things that I think would help. The first is just the very simple but profound idea that you have to listen more than you speak, right? I benefit from having big ears. So my mother always used to tell me to use them. And I think that so often we have trouble even getting to compromise because we don't even take the time to hear what the other person has to say. It's harder to do these days, I think, in the political context because there's just so much noise, and there's so much competing attention, and there tends to be what gets the most attention is conflict and sound bites and tweets, and the more controversial, the better. And so as a consequence, there's no dialogue. It just ends up being a constant contest across social media and the airwaves for attention. But each of you in your own areas, in your own fields, in your own work, there are probably people who are on the other side of whatever issue you're dealing with, or at least aren't as responsive or don't seem as invested in the things that you care about. And you can reach them, right? So let's say you're in a village and you want to educate girls, but there's some social resistance because of certain traditions to providing the girls the education that they need. Rather than just try to scold the men of that village about, you're backwards and you're patriarchal and blah, 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 sitting down with them and just finding, well, how do you think about these issues? And what do you hope for your own daughters? And do you think it's fair if some young woman who's really talented isn't getting an education? And actually trying to get a sense of what's the underlying ideas that they have. Now, ultimately they may be completely wrong, but just the mere act of you asking them what they think in a respectful way may at the margins soften things up a little bit, that you now can get something going, right? And that, I think, is just a basic exercise that not enough of us engage in, because we tend to just want to win an argument, right? I mean, we're trained, especially a lot of young people like you. You're smart and you're used to being clever and competing in school, and so and you start arguing and this is the benefit, by the way, of those of you who are not married. Once you get married, it may take you about 10 years to figure out that, like, winning the argument does not necessarily result in good outcomes. Like, there are a lot of times where I win the argument with Michelle, but I lose the war. And then over time you realize, you know what, let me try to figure out how am I just get things in a good place. And that may mean that I didn't win the argument. But that principle applies. Now, look, when there are some structural issues that are difficult to handle, and I alluded to some of them, the nature of social media, and in the United States, I don't know what's comparable here in India, but in the United States, it used to be when I was young, and now I'm talking about when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, back in the 70s, you basically had 3 channels. So everybody watched 3 channels. Everybody basically watched the same TV and the same newscasts and the same documentaries. And so even though there were disagreements, everybody kind of was operating on the same basic facts. Now you've got 500 channels, and you've got the internet and YouTube and Facebook. And so there are 100 versions of the truth, or 1,000, or 1,000,000. It becomes harder to compromise when there's so many different versions of the truth, and people aren't agreeing to the same facts. I used this example this morning. I can have a discussion with somebody who says, okay, yeah, there's climate change, but it's more important to alleviate poverty and get electricity to people, so we should use coal because it's cheaper. And then I can have an argument. I say, well, actually, solar is becoming cheaper, and what I have trouble doing is having a conversation where somebody just says, the climate's not changing. because then I have to, I mean, there's just a lot of work. That becomes almost like a theological argument. It's like, because it just has to do with somebody's decided this is what I believe, as opposed to looking at evidence and facts and the process of reasoning that signifies things like this scientific revolution. So that I think makes things harder, but this is part of the reason why I think it's so important not just to be an internet activist. Because I think that if all you're doing is communicating online, it is very hard to break across opinions or to reach in a serious way and engage people who don't agree with you. But if you're sitting face to face and you're having a conversation, even if it's something just as subtle as you notice, oh, this person's wearing a shirt with the logo of my favorite, football team. And maybe we can talk a little bit about, sports, which gives us something we haven't, right? Some possible areas of common experience that then leads you into the ability to have those conversations, all right? And then the last point I would make, though, about compromise, examine yourself so that you understand you can't be a purist if you want to actually make change. Because you will never get 100% of what you want. You will never get 100% justice or 100% equality or 100% clean air. And so you are, if you are living in the world trying to make change, then what you have to anticipate and embrace is the idea of incremental change, because that's generally how change works. That's how change works in nature, that's how change works in geology, and that's how change works in human societies. Now, I always used to tell my staff, and by the way, as president, I was often attacked more vocally and more fiercely from the progressives who had voted for me than from the other side on some issues, because their attitude was, you didn't get this, and why are we still waiting on that, and this is taking too long, and et cetera, and it was okay. I developed a thick skin. But what I would tell to my staff is our goal is to make things better. Better is always good. Better is not best, and we should try to get as much as we can done in this area that we're trying to get done. But you know what? If we walk away with some better, take it. That's good. Because the idea is the next time there'll be more to work on. And you just continually move in the right direction. And your work will be unfinished. As young as you are now, at the end of your life, all of you could end up being these amazing, leaders of social movements and prime ministers and entrepreneurs. And at the end of your life, something's not going to be finished. Something will be incomplete, because that's the nature of things, right? All right. Where are we at? Am I on an internet question now?
I think we can take an audience question.
An audience question's
Yes.
okay? All right. You said that authoritatively. That's good. Where was I? I guess I answered your question, didn't I? So it's a young ladies. That's it. I've been neglectful of this side of the room, haven't I? Or yes, go ahead. You are waving anxiously. Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you for your campaign, President Obama. I was a senior at Berkeley the night you were elected.
Oh, is that right?
It was amazing. We took to the streets because we finally had a relatable president, someone of color, with an immigrant history, constitutional law. So, I mean, I'm like your #1 fan.
Well, that's great. What are you doing now?
Yes, so my name is Pranita Saxena, and I run an organization called Citizen Gauge. We're a startup, and we're building the world's first waste-to-resource grid. And my question to you...
What does that mean?
Great. So...
Very quickly.
Sure.
Executive summary.
Sure. So 85% of India's waste can be recycled, but 90% is sitting in landfills. And this is the case, the US landfill, 67%. We don't have a way to connect different facilities that are biogas plants, energy producers, farms, recycling centers, paper mills, to someone's waste that is willing to keep it separated and then run it like a grid to, get it where it needs to go.
Got it.
So this is, of course, a technology platform, requires a lot of different things. My question to you is, when we are building something like this, we have to work with governments and really difficult policies to be able to scale. So one of the biggest issues in India and other countries is that as a startup, you can't even qualify to tender. So what can the Obama Foundation do to help companies and startups working in civic change on a systematic level? How can you perhaps provide risk capital or look at social impact bonds, or what solutions do you have where we can actually scale and participate in innovating the governance of essential resources?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think what is absolutely true is that there is a great interest right now in how do we channel capital into areas of great need, and in some cases using a market-based or a for-profit model to bring about social change. So the whole movement of impact investing, the interest in figuring out how do you leverage, for example, pension funds and other pools of capital to facilitate impactful change in the environment or in education or in other areas. How do philanthropies think in ways that aren't just, all right, we're going to give money to a charity, but rather we're going to give money to organizations that are trying to build sustainable models of self-help and income generation. Those are all a bunch of questions that we're very interested in. I don't have the specific answer for you right now because I think that part of what we're going to be doing is gathering up information about what's already available, and it may just be a function of us matching programs that are already developing with people who are looking for it. When I was president, alongside these young leaders programs that we started running, we also set up these global entrepreneurship summits where we would, it just happened yesterday. How'd it go? Were you there?
I was there. This morning was incredible.
Was it good?
It was amazing.
It's a good model. Thanks, Obama. It was good. So I'm glad it's continuing. And no, I actually knew that it was continuing. I just didn't know it was yesterday. So what we know is that just the function of matching up organizations that could use capital and have a good business plan with capital that's out there is something we know how to do. But how the foundation operates optimally to facilitate that, whether that's something we do in-house or whether that's rather something that we contract out or connect and partner with organizations that are already doing it. That's something that we haven't yet made a determination about. Oh, how do you work?
Yeah, and I mean industries where they can't take risks because the hegemony's already been part.
So you're talking about, are there government regulations that are in place that are preventing some of this, in part because they're probably protecting existing industries, legacies, and so forth. And well, that just goes back to what we've been talking about the whole time. There's no magic formula for that. You got to apply enough pressure and build up enough allies to overcome the barriers that are preventing you from this new innovation. And that means that you probably have to do an analysis of, and I have no idea what the constraints that you may be facing right now are, but one good place to start, this is a very simple sort of organizing one-on-one principle, is doing something that we call a power analysis. So often people start, because they're well motivated and want to do good, immediately start charging in and confront all these things that are blocking and preventing them from getting done what they want done, and they never really bothered to step back and evaluate what's the environment in which I'm trying to get this done. Right? So knowing nothing about what the constraints you have are, or what governments, what levels you're dealing with, or what have you, what I know is that you could get a blackboard and some chalk, and you could just start asking the questions: who makes decisions about X, Y, Z? What industries might be threatened by what you're doing? What are their ties to elected officials in that region? What industries or constituencies might benefit from what you're doing? Who are the leaders that have influence over those constituencies that you could connect with, right? So you just start mapping these things out. And hold on a second. So before you know how to overcome the pressure, you got to know where the pressure is coming from. You got to know the territory. Now, I gather this young man who just blurted something out, what he said was, what about the pressure you face? Well, yeah. Look, the fact is that you will experience pushback if you want to try to change something. Somebody's benefiting from the status quo. That's why it's the status quo. Sometimes they're benefiting it, sometimes they're benefiting from it directly, and they help design the status quo to benefit them. Sometimes it's just that they've adapted to the status quo. It may not be optimal to them, but they've adapted enough to it that now change feels disruptive and scary to them, and they don't want to change it. And yes, they will resist. And depending on the issue, and depending on the moment, and depending on the country, that resistance may be violent. Sometimes that resistance is simply economic. Sometimes that resistance is regulatory or legislative. Sometimes the resistance is social. Yeah, if this was easy, we wouldn't have to have this workshop. We'd go get pizza and beer. Yes, there will be resistance if you are trying to do something that is hard and worthwhile and important. And what I'm suggesting, though, is that the purpose of the analysis is to understand where the resistance is coming from, to understand the nature of the power of that resistance, to be able to understand what might counteract some of that resistance. It also means, though, remember what I said about slicing things into bite-sized pieces, it also means that if you don't have the power to overcome all the resistance all at once, well, then don't go just headlong, because that's a recipe for being really discouraged. So figure out what's the piece that offers less resistance and more allies, and get that done first, which then builds on success and then creates confidence. So this grid that you're trying to build, is it possible for you to pilot it in one small area where there's less resistance, or there's one politician who is interested in getting it done in that area? And is there a constituency that, where you can monetize what you're doing, and it puts some money in some ordinary people's pockets? And once you prove that, then it will be easier to overcome the bigger resistance, right? And so that's the purpose of the analysis. And it doesn't mean that, by the way, just by virtue of drawing it up on a blackboard, that the resistance goes away. But what it does do is it helps you know what it is that you're getting yourself into, right? Before you charge up the hill. How much time do we have? Oh, I'm not sure. It's lots of time. Is this one more question? Because I have to fly to Paris, and I'm already 15 minutes over. I've been having so much fun. Hold on a second. We just called on a young lady, so it's a gentleman's turn. No, we didn't start with the guys. This was the first. It was a young lady who we just started with. You guys are always trying to hustle me. It's good, though. It shows you're good at organizers. All right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take 2 more questions just because I'd like you. So, but it's a guy's turn, and so the ladies, put down your hands right now so that I can just see who it is that I should be calling on. I'm going to call on the guy with the beard, because it's a good beard. I like it. So let's see what he has to say.
Mr. President, good evening. I have to tell you that when you became president, I changed my Wi-Fi network to Obama is watching.
Oh, wow.
Just to get that dose of hope every morning, and it still continues.
That's great.
But my name is Akash Sethi, and I run a non-profit called Quest Alliance, which works on dropout prevention, school dropout prevention, and job readiness.
That's great.
The question is, automation is coming, and that's, expected to take a lot of jobs away, especially at the lowest rung. There are going to be probably new kinds of jobs that are created, and the skills that our school system is really giving young people don't really, they're not producing those kind of young people who have those skills. So what does it take to change the school system to think differently? And where pilots are working, like you mentioned, the scaling up of those pilots really needs a stronger political partnership.
Yeah.
And how do we really enable that kind of movement and change?
Well, it's a great question. I think your analysis is right. It's interesting. I was talking to both the Prime Minister and then had a short conversation with the opposition leader, and both of them talked about jobs and the concern about producing enough jobs for a very young Indian population. In the United States, there's a concern, even though the unemployment rate right now is low, thanks to some of the policies I put into place when I was president. But there's still concern about quality of jobs, temporary jobs, et cetera. This is a global challenge that we're going to be facing. It's a combination of globalization, automation, It is going to accelerate as a consequence of AI and digital processes that allow any job that lends itself to repetition is probably going to be automated fairly quickly and very efficiently. So you're right, the nature of work is going to change. Now, keep in mind that India is such a vast country, and there's still so many needs, that the capacity for India to continue to generate manufacturing jobs, blue-collar work, et cetera, will still be there, because there's just so much to do. This is such a big market, potentially. But what is also true is that as a percentage in every country, no matter how advanced or underdeveloped, the percentage of jobs that are going to require what's between your ears as opposed to what you're doing with your hands is going to grow. And you're right that the school systems that we generally have in the United States, in India, really date back to the transition between the agricultural age and the industrial age, and don't fit the demands of an economy built on top of this rapid technological change. I think that governments are going to be more and more responsive and will recognize this fact. But the challenge is going to be building models that that work and then facilitating the transition from the old system to the new, because there will be resistance to those changes. I'm a big supporter in the United States of teachers. I think teachers tend to be undervalued, underpaid. It is the most important job that we have out there. I'm also a big supporter of unions, because I believe that workers being able to join together to give themselves more leverage with their employers is important. There are times where I've said to teachers' unions, though, you've got to be in front of change as opposed to resisting change. Just because this is how things have been done, and you feel that it's a comfortable way to protect your members, you should be leading the charge in how do we redesign classrooms. But sometimes there's been resistance because the feeling is, you know what, this is going to put more responsibilities on us, or it lessens our security, or maybe it renders our own skills obsolete. And I just use that as one example of resistance that may arise out of the traditional systems. It goes back to the point I was making earlier, which is, I think, finding ways to prove concept in a redesigned school, and then starting to build allies and work outward. That's going to be the process by which this changes. But it will probably be a generation for these changes to take place, and it's going to be sporadic and spotty, and you need to anticipate that, particularly in a country as large as India. Okay? All right, last question. Yes. No begging because everybody here is so appealing and has wonderful things to say. All right, you right there, with the glasses. Oh, but you know what? This you are the one back there. Because no, right? Well, I guess I have three people with glasses in a row. I'm sorry. Right there, all the way in the corner. Right at the end. Last question.
Good evening, President. My name is Pratiksha. I work as an organic farmer in Rajasthan.
Cool. What do you grow?
All over India.
What do you grow?
Oh, what do I grow? Everything from grains to vegetables to pretty much anything, to kale, to everything.
Yeah. Why did you point about kale?
No, well, it's really...
What is that? Do I look like a kale guy? Or? So, actually, I do like kale.
See?
No, kale's fine.
Yeah, well, America made kale really popular, so we have to grow it now. Thank you so much for bringing us together here. In the farming community, we joke that there are two kinds of farmers: farmers who farm and farmers who talk. Farmers who talk are the ones you see on the news channels, at conferences, and farmers who farm feel like the farmers who talk, while their job is also important, but they get so far removed from the challenges and the needs of our work that they start misrepresenting us. So in your experience, how should one divide their time between raising awareness for their cause and actually doing the work of the cause?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's going to be different for different people, right? Because part of it depends on what stage of life you're in, what the nature of your work is. Are you in a moment in time in which your advocacy seems to be making the biggest difference? Going back to Dr. King, his training was as a minister. And as he became more active in the civil rights movement, he probably neglected his ministerial duties for his church. But we're glad he did, because there was a higher, better use for his talents than just being in a single church. Although that might have involved a sacrifice for him and his family. So I think that it's going to be different for different people. What I do agree with is that trying to stay rooted in the work that is important to you and the people that you claim to advocate for is absolutely vital for you to be effective. And as an advocate, I experienced this even as president. One of the toughest things about being president was you were in this bubble, and the U.S. president is almost unique, even among world leaders, because of security concerns, the way in which you are just bottled up, and you can't walk down the street, and now with selfies, I mean, even set aside concerns about guns. I can't walk down the street without everybody want to take a picture. And see, I figured that. So what I often found is that I had to really work hard and be intentional just to be in a conversation with the people who it used to be I'd routinely sit in their living rooms or meet on a corner or invite to a town hall meeting. Now it was like hard to just have that conversation. And so if that was true, and my job was to be president, but I still felt as if I had lost something by not having that touch in that field, then obviously if you're advocating on behalf of organic farming and you're not doing any farming at all, then you're going to lose touch. So I don't think there's a formula here. I think being aware of the fact that if all you do is you're just a talking head, that over time you're going to lose touch with the thing that motivated you in the first place. I think that's a good place to start. But I also think that at the end of the day, part of what you have to measure then is what is satisfying to you. Where is it that you want to best deploy your talents? Because, and this is probably a good closing message to all of you, there's so many different ways to bring about change and to do good work and to help people. And I don't think any of you have to feel wedded to one single way of doing it. You can be a business person primarily who then also is supporting good work and is mentoring somebody as well. You can be a full-time activist who is every single day beating on the doors of power to bring about change. You can be primarily a writer who's working just to spread good ideas, but you're shy and you don't like being out front. You can be an extrovert and want to run for office and be in front of the cameras and be a spokesperson on behalf of a cause, right? There are just so many different ways that you can make a difference. And the key is for you to find what is right for you and what feels as if not only are you having the most impact, but it is also giving you a sense of strength and satisfaction. And if each of us are finding that way of even if it's small measures of courage, those single steps, then over time, India is going to be better, and the world is going to be better, and I'm confident that's what's going to happen. Because there's been a remarkable group, and I've enjoyed the conversation. Any closing words from you, Anju?
No, I think I would just like to say that it's been an honor for all of us to actually have this opportunity to ask you questions. So thank you so much for your time. And I think what you've said today about taking things forward and how we as a community need to come together, it really resonates with all of us. So thank you so much, President Obama.
Thank you, everybody. Good luck.